Welcome, everyone. I'm so thrilled to have Dr. Michelle Chatman joining us today. My name is David Vine. I'm a member of the faculty at the Department of Anthropology at American University, and really thrilled to have everyone joining us today. If it looks like I'm distracted every once in a while, it's because I'm getting a little ping telling me that someone else is joining our event today. But right now I'd love to introduce Michelle and then turn things over to her for what I think is going to be a really exciting and meaningful session that will help introduce us to a range of contemplative practices. Real quickly, Dr. Michelle Chatman is assistant professor in the Crime, Justice, and Security Studies program at the University of the District of Columbia. She teaches courses on restorative justice, urban youth development, girls and gangs, and research methods. And she's currently designing the youth studies concentration in the Crime, Justice, and Security Studies program. She's also a self-identified and renowned contemplative educator. And she integrates mindfulness, storytelling, deep listening, and jazz into her instruction in a variety of contexts. She's also a leader in the contemplative movement on UDC's campus and leads faculty retreats, professional development workshops, and a weekly meditation series. Should mention also that Dr. Chatman's current research is funded by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, and it focuses on mindfulness and restorative justice as a violence prevention strategy for African American youth. Let me welcome Dr. Chatman and thank you for joining us. I heard Dr. Chatman give a fantastic presentation as part of a panel back in January on AU's campus, and immediately felt like we had to invite her back. I probably should have started here, but she's done so much since getting her PhD in our Department of Anthropology. But I should mention that she is one of our proud alums. We are extraordinarily proud to count her among the alums of our PhD program. So thank you so much for joining us, Michelle.
Thank you so much. And it is quite fine for everyone to call me Michelle. So thank you so very much for this invitation. It's really an honor. I'm really looking forward to our time together today, and good afternoon to everyone who's joined the session. I'd like us to get started with a little centering and just sort of getting into our bodies. I don't know if you all have been sitting for most of the morning and on calls and teaching and so forth, but I just love us to take a few moments to breathe and maybe do a little movement. And this is often the way that gatherings of contemplatives begin. I'll share a bit more when I talk about the Center for Contemplative Mind and Society, but we often begin our convenings with a practice. So I'd like to offer that now. So it's up to you. You can keep your camera on, your video on, or you can turn it off. We're going to do some breathing and just moving our arms and twisting and bending a little bit, just to loosen up a little, okay? So if you would, however you're seated or standing right now, just take in a breath. Breathing in deeply through the nose, bringing the air to the belly, exhaling through the nose. Breathing in again through the nose, deeply and slowly. Bringing the air to the belly, and exhaling through the nose. Drop the shoulders and just notice the feeling of your feet touching the floor, wherever they are. Notice the sense of stability, groundedness, centeredness. Right here. Inhale and slowly lift your arms up. Stopping at your point of discomfort. Moving forward, back to you. Slowly lifting the arms. Reach to the side. Stretch. Steady your nose. Just bring some gentle movement to your body. Turn your head to the left slowly. Allow for a nice stretch. And bring to the breathe. Slowly take it to the other side. Again, allow a nice stretch. And then breathe. And back to the center. A couple of shoulder rolls. Going forward. Go back now. And finding a place of stillness. Now draw your attention inward. Bring your awareness inward. And just notice how you're feeling at this moment. And if you can, give a word or two to whatever you're feeling at this moment. Name the feeling. And just notice it. No judgment, no story about it. We're just noticing and naming. And letting it be. Now, if you have a pen and pencil and some paper nearby, I'd like to invite you to take a moment or so, maybe just 1 minute, to jot down what you're feeling. Jot down what has arisen for you just from that opening practice.
And before, or as people are getting their pens and pencils and paper, if anyone is having trouble hearing, let me know. Michelle, you were breaking up a little bit at times. It seemed audible to me throughout, but if anyone it is better now. And maybe if there's anything open in your computer that you can shut down, that might help, but hopefully it is better now. So.
Is that better now? I've plugged in a microphone. Hopefully that will help.
That's fantastic.
Great, great.
But again, yeah, throughout the session, if anyone is having any technological problems, just feel free to chat me using the chat function at the bottom of the screen.
Excellent. So let's take a minute. Just take a minute and jot down, do a little writing on what came up for you, if anything. And you can also draw, if that's your preference. Take about 30 more seconds to finish that up. And now I'd like to invite a few folks, maybe 4 or 5 people, to share, if they'd like, what came up for them, what that practice was like, opening up a webinar or a session in that way. What did you become aware of? And you can use the raise hand feature and we'll recognize you. So 4 or 5 folks, floor is open. I'm not sure, David, if they can unmute themselves, or it looks like maybe they can. Great.
Yeah, everyone can now unmute yourself. Patricia, it looks like.
So this is Patty Sullivan in St. Petersburg, Florida. Thank you very much for that opener. And a couple things happened. One, mind, body seemed to calm both, right? So when you're bringing your thoughts back into the present moment now, it opens the opportunity for your mind and body to connect a little more, and that's what happened for me. So calming the brain waves, at the same time calming the physicality of being here. And the key, I think, to this for me is it made me stop thinking about the bike ride I had earlier and the yoga I'm going to do later. It's, oh, I'm here now, right? It's bringing me into the moment. So it was a gentle and compassionate icebreaker that, not with meeting people, but with the intent for me of being present for the moment of what's to come.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And Falami, if I pronounced your name correctly, I hope.
Yes, you did. Greetings. What came for me was listening, and I just wrote a quick little poem, listening to the trees, adoring your presence, peace, stillness, strength, centering. So during that time was what I heard, and as I listened and just felt the presence of the trees as I'm here looking at them and being present here in this space. So it was a very opening time for me.
And it looked like Caroline wanted to share something as well.
Yeah, hi, Michelle. Thank you, and everybody. I feel like I'm so glad to talk to people to whom I'm not personally related right now. I love my family, but I also love other people too. And that's one of the things that I was thinking as I was moving and listening to Michelle's very calming voice. I was just like, oh yeah, I'm with some people, attenuated, and that just, I don't know, it was just this real pulsation of I don't know, satisfaction, good vibes, whatever you want to call it. So thank you.
Thank you, Caroline and Falami. Yes, it reminds you of how much, it kind of is nice to connect with other people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Wonderful. If there's not another, I'll just move forward. Did anyone else want to share a bit of what that practice was like for them? Okay. Great, then we'll move on. So my intention for today is just that we can engage in a bit of practice together, and that we could sort of dialogue about what contemplative practices are, the range of contemplative practices, how they're used, and also offer a little bit of ideas on what self-care and contemplation and mindfulness could look like for us now and what it might do for us. So if you just give me a moment, I will share my screen here. Uh-oh, David, I think I need you enable screen sharing.
Now you should have, we practiced this before, but
You did.
I think I needed to reset the settings again, apparently, but you should have the power now.
Okay, great. Let me get to the beginning of this. And all right. All righty, we are ready. Okay, so just examining contemplative practice as we are in a pandemic. I heard this quote this weekend. I hosted the Black Mindfulness Summit, which is a creation of my own. And this was our second year. We were to have, of course, an in-person convening in Maryland, and that didn't happen. So we shifted and did a virtual session. And one of my elders shared this quote with us, a Yoruba proverb. The Yoruba people are from West Africa, the region that is now Nigeria. The man who leaves home in the morning is not the same man who returns in the evening. And that just really spoke to me powerfully about change and the things that happen to us as we're journeying throughout our days, and how they really can shift us, how they can sometimes unsettle us. So we'll talk a bit more about that. So David already mentioned a lot of this stuff. I'm an assistant professor at UDC, graduate of AU, where I received my master's and PhD in anthropology, and RWJF fellow. He mentioned all of these things. I serve on the board for the Center for Contemplative Mind and Society, which is based in Massachusetts, and the Mindfulness in Education Network, which focuses on mindfulness and education for the K-12 environment. I also facilitate our UDC Mindfulness Initiative. I'm a vocalist. I'm an avid Earth, Wind, and Fire fan, a mom, a wife, and what I think to be a pretty decent human being. So we're focusing today on being grounded. And what that means for me is having a sense of presence in your body, in your mind, and in your emotions, and a sense of connection with your root, with the earth, with your foundation. I think when you're grounded, you allow yourself to feel centered and balanced, even when your external circumstances.
Welcome to Cable. I'm Annie Weldon. I'm studying environmental governance.
Sorry about that, David. I'm not sure what happened, but I just muted somebody. When your external environment is not very balanced, when it's in a state of disruption, having a sense of groundedness allows us to be present and be engaged and just be fully there no matter what's going on. So one way that people often ground or achieve this state of centeredness is through mindfulness. And I'll say quickly, I have probably too many slides. I'm going to move through these mindfulness slides somewhat quickly so we can get to the contemplative practices portion. Okay, so I'm happy to share these slides at the end of the session. So we know that mindfulness is this moment by moment awareness of our thoughts, our feelings, bodily sensations, holding that awareness without judgment, being totally in the moment, which is not an easy state, but that is what it is. We also know that Dr. John Kabat-Zinn popularized mindfulness in this country, in this context, around the 70s with his creation of MBSR, mindfulness-based stress reduction, as a way to manage pain and discomfort in his patients. Mindfulness has become incredibly ubiquitous. It's used in a number of contexts and fields. It's used in athletics and education, K-12, also in higher ed. We can think about mindful parenting. Many law enforcement agencies are beginning to use mindfulness to address issues of trauma. So there's lots of mindfulness around. Corporations have integrated mindfulness and social emotional learning into their profile as an organization, such as Google, who has the Search Inside Yourself program. And we see mindfulness in a lot of places nowadays. The research on mindfulness has also seen an incredible increase in the past 20 years. We've gone from seeing virtually hardly any publications across the board in mindfulness around 2005, just about 100 per year, to like an incredible amount of publications, of over 1,000 publications now. And the research is pretty consistent in terms of the benefits of mindfulness, right? Even a somewhat short mindfulness practice of about 40 minutes per day over an 8-week period can result in increased self-compassion, lowered anxiety and depression, lower levels of burnout, and just overall well-being, increased emotional support for teachers, for students, for college-level students, and K-12 students. So the research tells us that mindfulness reduces brain distractions, and in this way allows us to receive some support in our learning by helping us focus our attention and our awareness. It reduces depression and anxiety, as well as just supporting our overall well-being, which is really important, I think, for this audience, because we know that in the college environment today, there is a mental health crisis, and many of our students are faced with depression and anxiety. This is before the pandemic. So of course, right now with what we're seeing, it can only be heightened. So the how of mindfulness, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with this, right? It helps us to manage the amygdala, helps us manage the brain's fight, flight, or freeze response, increases our brain's neuroplasticity, really supports a growth mindset, and very much centered around the breath. When we are intentional about our breathing, when we slow down our breathing, it just has tremendous impact for our well-being. It enhances our concentration, improves our mood, it helps regulate our blood pressure. There's even some research that says mindfulness, or a regular mindfulness practice, can also support your immune system. So lots of benefits there. And lots of benefits to educators. This is a photo of a group of K-12 teachers undergoing Breathe for Change teacher training. It's a very intense training program where teachers learn mindfulness practices, yoga, over a rather short period of time. Usually they have summer trainings. And there's research that shows that stress can have a contagious aspect, right? Teachers who bring stress into the classroom, there have been some studies where teachers and students, their students were swabbed for the stress hormone in their saliva, and they saw a relationship between teachers who had high levels of stress and students who have high levels of stress. And of course, we know it's bidirectional. Students also bring sometimes lots of stress into the classroom. And so it's really helpful when you can turn to some practices to support well-being. As I mentioned before, stress of our students that we're seeing in the classroom, stress of faculty as well, I will add, costs us a lot of money, costs us a lot of time for missed work, and just declines our health overall. This particular program, Koru Mindfulness, was designed for college students and emerging adults, and it has shown to have some really positive benefits. They're based in North Carolina at Duke University. I've undergone some training with Koru. Very popular, but there are many programs now that folks are getting trained in to offer mindfulness services to their populations. So let's just stop for a minute. And STOP is an acronym, stands for stop, take a breath. It's good for me because I tried to speed through those slides. Observe how you're feeling again, just checking in again. Observe what's happening around you. And then proceed. A really simple practice that you can integrate at any time into your day. And I want to credit Rhonda McGee, my sister friend, who's the author of the recent book, The Inner Work of Racial Justice. Wonderful, wonderful book. I encourage you to look into that. And let's move forward now. Let's talk about contemplative practices. This is artist Kadir Nelson's rendition of post-COVID life called After the Storm. And I'd like us to just spend a minute to take this incredible painting in. I invite you to look at it slowly. I invite you to pay attention to what has heart and meaning for you, to borrow the words of Angeles Arrien, the late anthropologist. What has heart and meaning for you in this painting? What speaks to you? And let's hear from a couple of people. Share with us what has heart and meaning from this photo, from this painting for you.
For those who might not be able to see it in the chat box, Caroline Wilkins shared, "I love the way the eyes shine so brightly." And it looked like Maria.
Yeah. I think the picture is very multiracial and diverse, which sort of shows the faces of people around the world. And also, one thing that struck me is that they have this hopeful element in the midst of whatever they're experiencing, that we cannot let go of hope and looking forward to the future, whatever we are experiencing in the present.
Thank you, Maria.
And then I see a hand from Catalina Villar.
Hello.
We can hear you, Catalina. Go ahead.
Okay. I observed some of the things that they have commented already, how their faces are very open and they're looking forward. Obviously, they're looking up and all in the same direction at once. But what I like, and I noticed because this morning I had a meeting with girlfriends and we haven't seen each other in a long time, and we said, what is the first thing you want to do as soon as you can? And we said hug. And what I like is that everybody in there is close to each other. Everybody in that picture is very physically close. And that's something that we have lost from strangers, because even if we're enclosed in our own homes and we might still be hugging with our immediate family, but when we're walking out, those of us who can afford to walk outside, there is that physical distance that has been imposed by the new circumstances. And that's what I noticed. That's the first thing I noticed. Everybody in there is close to each other.
They're very close. Thank you so much. Thank you for those thoughts. Yes, everyone is looking up in the same direction. It's a very diverse group of people. We see a lot of diversity in terms of age and ethnicity and background. The clouds have parted. There's a hope and a lightness on their face, on all of their faces, right? And I don't know if you've noticed over here on the left side, the little boy, the indigenous man is holding his thumb. Oh, right, so beautiful, so beautiful. And they're touching each other. There's a hand here on this man's shoulder. I think maybe this elder is touching his shoulder, and there's a hand being held here. So lots of closeness, lots of intimacy. I chose this photo to introduce our section on contemplative practices because contemplative practices are very broad. And contemplative practices really represent the ways that we learn and engage in our home communities, in our home countries. And so they're very broad, they're very open. After the storm, thank you, Kadir Nelson. So the Center for Contemplative Mind and Society is an organization that promotes the use of contemplative, introspective, reflective practices to support learning, to support research environments, to support learning for the cultivation of a just and compassionate society. So here we have a few photos from the summer session that Caroline Wilkins has attended, and Professor Dorina Thomas has attended, Professor Michelle Levere has attended, right? Every summer we have a contemplative summer session, which lasts about a week, and it's like college for professors, and it's incredible. We stay in dorms, we have delicious meals at Smith College, and we attend workshops and sessions, and we transform our course syllabi into one that incorporates contemplative approaches for the advancement of justice and compassion and community and diversity. And so we have here a group of folks doing an art practice, an art workshop. We have some folks over here on the upper right doing a movement practice. We have Rhonda McGee, whom I mentioned before, leading a session in our large room. And on this particular day, a few of us sort of snuck away from the session to just spend some time with this incredible sculpture of Sojourner Truth. So here we have the tree of contemplative practices, and you can find this on the C-Mind website on contemplativemind.org. And I'd like you to just take a moment to look at this tree and notice that at the base of the tree, the root, the foundation of contemplative practices is communion and connection and awareness. When I did my graduate studies in anthropology for my master's degree, the area that I focused on was youth socialization in the Gambia, West Africa. And I evaluated a program for street children called almudos, young boys who were being raised by Muslim scholars who oftentimes would go around in the cities and towns and ask people for alms, ask them for money to support them. And as I observed this group of young males and their teachers, and as I observed West African culture more broadly in the Gambia, Senegal, Nigeria, and what have you, I saw these ways that people communed and connected and promoted awareness. And I noticed that it was just a really different way of living, of course, than what I was used to. And so that experience in West Africa with those children and in those villages, really I often talk about as sort of the genesis of my awareness of contemplative practices. And I'll say the genesis of my awareness of them because I had been engaging in some of those practices, but didn't have the language of contemplative practice to assign to it. So we have communion, connection, and awareness. And then we have these different branches of contemplative practices, stillness practices, generative practices, movement-based practices, even activist practices and relational practices like circle dialogue, storytelling, and creative practices. Take about 30 seconds to look more deeply into this tree. And share with us any of the practices here that resonate for you, that represent practices that you engage in to promote your centeredness, groundedness, presence, or that you would like to engage in. Let's hear from maybe 3 people. Would anyone like to unmute and share which practices from the tree resonate with them? I think Falami raised her hand.
So the practices that really resonate with me are ceremonies and rituals based in spiritual traditions. I am a Yoruba practitioner, and so that is a practice. And they're branching off from there is establishing a sacred space, and have several sacred spaces here in my home. And dance, I'm a dancer, I am a poet, I'm a photographer. So all of those particular contemplative practices show up for me. And I like to say that I can sing. However, some people decline and say that I don't. So, and then meditation, and I'm also a sound healer, so I incorporate that within my contemplative practice as well. So this is very much a part of my tree.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
I see Caroline's hand. And then Patricia, Caroline and Patricia.
Yeah, for me, yoga has been really important. I've been practicing a long time. I got my teacher certification, and, you know, meditation, journaling. You know, when you talked about not having the language to name the things that you'd been doing, you know, I've kept a diary since I was a little girl, and for me, like, that reflection has always been really important in grounding, and, you know, been something I carried with me. I think that in the past 5 years, probably more, I've been trying to do more volunteering and bearing witness as I try to, you know, live my social justice values without elbowing people out of the way.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. And those journals, they pile up over time, I know. Thank you. There was one other person whose hand I noticed.
This is Patty Sullivan again, St. Pete. And I'm an adjunct for American grad school. And then my real gig is executive coaching. And as an executive coach, all of these things are brought in to different clients at different times. But I think the idea of for my clients, and then I also practice myself, the idea of deep listening, I would call that intuitive listening, really listening for the feeling behind the words, providing a safe space of quiet and non-judgment. I am a certified yoga therapist. It took me as long to get that as it did my PhD. So it was a serious commitment there. And that is journaling and meditation and science and centering, quieting the mind, the Buddhist belief of loving kindness, compassion. So this tree looks very familiar to me, and I love introducing it to executives and leaders at different levels.
Wonderful. Thank you. So yes, a range of practices, but it doesn't include everything, of course, right? Right? I see Caroline saying right. My mother, God rest her soul, transitioned 2 years ago. She used to crochet, and she made these beautiful, colorful blankets for everyone in the family. And that was her practice. And she shared with me that as she made those blankets, she said a prayer for her family members. She thought of them, she held them in her heart as she was creating this warmth for her loved ones. Gardening is a contemplative practice, right? Walking, we see other forms of movement. We have walking meditation. I think that just about anything you bring a certain level of awareness and intention to could be considered a contemplative practice. And I like to talk about this because oftentimes when we think of being mindful or grounded or centered or well, you know, those things have been commodified in a particular way, and we think we need certain things, and we think we need to look a certain way, right? We need a yoga mat, or we need the candles and all of those things, and not always. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that we can start with where we are, with the things that bring us joy and centeredness and peace, and we can approach them in a contemplative way. So, C-Mind offers a number of resources to the higher ed community, webinars that are stored on the website, our annual summer session, and then our annual conference. So I encourage you to check it out. And as I've said, these practices cultivate a critical first-person awareness. And they may include things like mindfulness, meditation, yoga, rituals, reflective writing, but they can encompass other practices as well. And they are engaged for the purpose of deepening our awareness to ourselves, our connection to other people and other living beings, the natural world, and they can really transform learning environments, promoting community, empowerment, compassion, and justice. One of the gentlemen who offered a webinar, which is on the C-Mind website, is David Trelevin, and he does work with trauma-informed mindfulness approaches. And in his session, he offered these words, or it's not a direct quote, but it's to this point, we can no longer afford to say that student well-being happens outside of academia and outside of the classroom. We knew that before this pandemic, we certainly know it now. Because if nothing else, we are all very concerned with the well-being of our students. And many of them are having a difficult time focusing on academics, completing final exams, because in terms of their health and well-being, they're in a traumatized state, as all of us are, quite frankly. And so because these things are present in the learning environment, I think it's really important that we have practices and approaches that we can use in the classroom and outside of the classroom. Dominant and subordinate identities, adverse childhood experiences, poverty, racism on the institutional and individualized level. All of these things are present in the learning environment, and all of these things impact how students learn, how professors and teachers teach. But I think now more than ever, we have an opportunity to transform our classrooms, our higher ed environments, and our communities into places that center healing and well-being. And my work at UDC, these are some of the practices that I offer and that we engage in as community. And some of these you've seen on the tree. 10 mindful movements, study breaks, where we reserve a few hours and just offer practice for students during midterms and final exams with healthy snacks. I use vision boards in my classroom to help students really create a vision for themselves beyond college graduation. I work with a number of first-gen students who aren't completely sure that they'll be able to finish. So whatever I can do to support them creating that vision and realizing that vision, I'm happy to offer. Reflective journaling, a number of practices. So let's get into a few things I'd like to offer for staying grounded. As I mentioned before, this weekend I offered the Black Mindfulness Summit virtually, and it was just an incredible time. One person who attended is Melissa Carter, who directs mindfulness education for New York University, or NYU. She's a phenomenal teacher, just a wonderful person. And she noted for us that, you know, under so-called normal circumstances, we celebrate the successes and the joys. And we only touch the grief and discomfort that's all around us under normal circumstances. However, now we are engaging regularly with grief, with sadness, with anger. And so our bodies, our emotions, we're constantly triggered. The stress response system is constantly triggered. And so we need to turn to practice to ground us and to return us to center. So just a few tips. Practicing compassion for yourself and others. There's an article I read a couple of weeks ago in the Washington Post that said something like, you know, you may not feel like being productive during a pandemic. I think it's important to note that we're all not just working from home because our country decided or realized that people are a lot more productive when they have the opportunity to do that, right? And they're healthier when they can work from home. We're working from home because we are in a global crisis and we're trying to manage it as best as we can with little power from, our perspective. So to practicing that compassion, which what I mean is really taking a look at what expectations we're placing on ourselves and others and being compassionate about those expectations. Developing a regular practice, mindfulness, meditation, or contemplative practice. And then taking some regular breaks to restore, to recenter, to lean on that practice and to lean into that practice.
Lean on me.
Finding community. It's tough to be in isolation, so find an online community, a phone community. I've enjoyed, quite frankly, watching my neighbors across the street play badminton or whatever they're trying to do out there. I've enjoyed seeing families take walks, and I notice when I go out for those walks, I'm a bit more friendly. I'm like, hey, I'm keeping a distance, but it's like I want you to know that I see you, and I want you to see me too, right? So having a sense of community and connection, even as we're honoring the social distance world. Managing your technology. The first week of virtual classes, I was just about done. I didn't understand that you can't do 3 and 4 hours. Well, I can't. A 3 and 4 hour stretch on technology is just really not healthy. It's quite exhausting, actually. So to the extent that you can, do your video conferencing in chunks and then take a break. Change environments, go look out the window, stand on your balcony, do something physical. And then focusing on purpose. Reaching out to other people, supporting local businesses at this time, picking up items for neighbors, sharing credible health information with others through social media or phone calls or the way that you prefer to do that. And then having real conversations about what's happening. I think that can also help us stay grounded. Remembering yes and. Remembering yes and. Yes, there is much suffering and injustice. And I am grateful for the birds and the warm weather. Yes, people are dying and some communities are much more vulnerable and adversely affected by this pandemic than other communities. And I'm grateful to have an opportunity to spend more time with my 11-year-old and support her learning. So allow for the yes and. The and doesn't negate the yes. And this is where our practice can really help us be settled in that. It is hard to hold those tensions. It is hard to go through the days knowing that there is so much suffering and injustice and pain and uncertainty, and also feel okay enough to appreciate those little moments of light and hopefulness. And then becoming curious, and this is something we talked about on our call this weekend. Perhaps we can use this time, not necessarily to grind and take all of the free classes that Harvard is offering and do all of the trainings and become better and write that book or that chapter, the book chapter, but just maybe sitting with the question, what am I becoming now? What can we become as a community, as a global community? What does now call for? I think it calls for more from all of us. More compassion, more consideration, more patience, more tolerance, more openness. So who can we be on the other side of this? I want to pause for a moment and see if there are any questions or if anything's popping up for you right now before we move on. Okay. My good friend, Melissa, I must also credit for helping me understand that self-care is not what you think about after you are absolutely drained and have nothing to give, But we can think about self-care as a moment-by-moment check-in, a moment-by-moment conversation oriented around these two questions. How do I feel? And what do I need? This is more important now when our emotions are absolutely assaulted by what's going on now. How do I feel? I'm feeling nervous. I'm feeling anxious. I'm feeling fearful. What do I need? Maybe I need to just acknowledge that I'm feeling fearful. I'm feeling anxious. And then where do I move from there? Perhaps some journaling, perhaps getting some air, some movement. Perhaps I just need to cry. And allowing yourself the space and time to do that. This past weekend, quite frankly, I needed to see my mindfulness community that looked like me, because I know what's happening in my communities. And I know that when Georgia goes back to doing business as usual, a lot of people in my community are going to suffer, and other communities as well. So I needed to see my folks, and I needed to know that people were okay. And we needed to sing and hear some music and cry and remember our ancestors. We needed to do contemplative practice in the way that worked for us. That was really important. So a self-care process, and then we're going to break into groups for about 20 minutes and have you do a little work around this. And this is Melissa, my good friend. And she invited us to think about self-care in this way. You have your unicorns and rainbows, your luxurious self-care. Yes, yes, give it up for unicorns and rainbows or whatever else you want to put there. Bubble baths, massages, Caribbean vacations, you know, whatever goes in that category. Wonderful. It has a purpose. And then on the other side, we've got the icky stuff that we don't want to do, but we feel better after we've done them, like talking to our therapist, calling our parents, exercising, setting boundaries, saying no, going to bed at a reasonable hour, turning off the computer or the phone at a reasonable hour, right? And then there are the planned activities for our well-being. So somewhere between the unicorns and rainbows and the icky, let's focus on what can we purposefully plan to tend to our well-being, our groundedness, our centeredness, with our days now looking as they look, trying to teach kids, trying to do meals, trying to go grocery shopping while protecting yourself, trying to work jobs from home, and taking all of this information about what's happening around us. So for the next 15 minutes or so, David's going to divide you into groups. We have about 20 folks on the call, so maybe about 3 or 4 groups, David, so we have about 7, 8 people in each group. And we're going to give you about 15 minutes, just 2 o'clock now. We're going to give you to about 2:15 to share with your group your self-care process. You can share your unicorns and rainbows, your icky, but get to that purposeful part, right? And maybe things that you've seen in the on the tree of contemplative practice, and maybe it's stuff that's not even there. So this is also an opportunity to share and hear from other folks how they're managing, how they're staying grounded. So David, if you want to go on and initiate the rooms.
Do that right now, and just note that everyone will need to join the room they've been invited to join. And we'll look forward to having people share in small groups the practices they've been engaged with, as Michelle said.
David. So hello, Rachel Watkins.
Hello, Michelle Chatman. How are you?
I am well. Sorry, folks, I just had to have that moment.
We did. We had to have that moment. Yes, it was going to happen.
So I think we're all back now. So I'd love to hear and open the floor for just a couple of minutes to hear folks share or ask questions based on what came up in your groups around your self-care process. maybe new practices you can think about for yourself, new ways you can think about sustaining yourself between the luxurious and the icky, or whatever that looks like for you. Or if there are other things, other questions or points you want to raise right now, this is a great time to do it.
And Caroline wanted to, yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to, well, thank my group members, because I felt, this is one of the things that I find really gorgeous about whenever I'm doing any of these contemplative practice workshops or webinars, that I feel like I've immediately found my fellow travelers. And, I love, I immediately felt bonded with people that I haven't, that I've only met in their little Hollywood Squares versions. And so it was really, but one of the things that I think came up a lot in our group was the need that we're leaning into our routines and the setting of boundaries, sort of to, kind of hold ourselves upright in those ways that I think are really powerful. And some people were talking about the ways that they hadn't really had schedules before, that they had a lot more flexibility, but inviting themselves, giving themselves an opportunity to have a schedule was supportive, and just, being able to set some boundaries with your work, to understand that, if somebody else has set their hair on fire, that's their responsibility. I found that really enriching.
So this time and space is, some people are using it as an opportunity to establish boundaries that had not existed prior. Yeah. Sounds really good. Anybody else? What are folks adding to their self-care contemplative routine? Puzzle book, love it. Catalina?
Hello.
I can hear you.
I dig into what Caroline was saying with what I was commenting to Michelle in the little small group, and I'm just asking everybody, I'm opening the question, because something I was commenting in the small room was that when Caroline said, I feel that I come here and I find my tribe, it's evident that we're all interested in contemplative practices. And some of us are professionals at it. So we all have a desire and an interest in this kind of self-care, and are aware of forms to practice compassion for ourselves and for others, or at least are learning and interested in practicing them. But what I am finding, and I teach at another institution, so this is from my experience in another campus, is that I am in conflict with colleagues that I see who are not gaining that consciousness, who are not adjusting their experience of what's happening now to a new reality, to this crisis, to this very, not only extraordinary, unprecedented moment, but negative, unprecedented moment. And I was mentioning to Michelle that I don't know how to sit comfortably with that conflict. I have already yelled at people. I have already had encounters in which I'm telling people, you're crazy. What do you mean you're going to give a final exam like you did last semester? This semester is not last semester. You cannot be thinking of your syllabus exactly the same way that you did last semester, because it no longer applies. That when they're not making that adjustment, it drives me absolutely crazy. And I don't know what to do with it. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I hope to have a job next semester at the other campus. I don't know what toes I'm stepping on.
I hear you, and I'd love for other folks to chime in. You know, even before this pandemic, my early movements in contemplative and mindfulness circles were filled with anger, because I saw the ways in which people used contemplation and meditation as a way to just sort of spiritual bypass and not pay attention to real inequities and real injustices happening on campuses, in classrooms, in the larger society. And fortunately, you know, other folks are now beginning to talk like this, and there are groups emerging, Mindfulness for the People, and there's a group on Facebook, Mindfulness and Social Justice, even with Rhonda's work. And, you know, lots of folks are now centering justice and equity in their self-awareness, mindfulness, contemplative work. My hope is that people will wake up. I mean, it's unconscionable how folks cannot wake up given what's happening to us now, to see the need for a shift in how we approach teaching and our students and each other. But I think we can, from a place of compassion and love and justice for humanity, express ourselves in that way. I mean, mindfulness and contemplation doesn't mean you can't be angry and raise hell when it needs to be raised. I think it's important.
So you're giving me permission to yell.
Yes, I am.
There's a contemplative aspect
I
to
am.
yelling.
Be very aware. There's some conversation in the group chat around group discussion around nature, mindful walking, green space, when we were thinking about what other practices people could incorporate. Lots of mindful meditation and yoga. Caroline said, this semester is not last semester, words to live by. Yes, some people are really like, they don't get it. They don't get it, that the world beneath us has absolutely shifted.
Looks like Falami and Rachel both wanted to jump in.
Great.
Hi, this is actually Fumi. I'm Falami's wife. So we're here together. Caroline, is that who just spoke? No, Catalina. Did I say your name? Oh my God. So I don't know exactly how I'm on this meeting right now, but I'm very excited to be here. I am a high school teacher, and I'm also a student, a graduate student working on my PhD. And the words that she said of just having my colleagues to understand that this is not business as usual. And we're sitting here doing instantly online teaching to high school students, and we have not addressed their issues, what they're dealing with. We cliche on the K-12 life of social emotional learning, yet we do not do social emotional learning. And I am definitely that one who struggles with trying to incorporate circles and responsive restorative practices, and just talking to my kids and giving them voice. And it is a very difficult piece to be, that one lone ranger in a building where we're still worried about whether kids checked in on a computer or whether they did any work, and we're not dealing with their needs, as well as we're not looking at the needs of the teachers who have to teach them. Mm-hmm. So I'm just I couldn't figure that out. So she's coming in here to start something. Oh, there I am. Okay, this is me. My wife just came and did that. So I'm just to sit here and listen to this is definitely affirming. And I do feel like I found my tribe accidentally. I don't know how I ended up here. But it does help me and give me hope to know that the way that I'm thinking and the way that I want my research to be is on point. And how do we bridge, I think, as a teacher that's trying to be, on an academic level, how do we bridge the gap between what your research is and how classroom teachers, frontline folks get to do this work? How do we bridge it? And that's just where I am. But I definitely wanted to throw out, there is a K-12 teacher on this line and how it really looks. And I am also in the state of Georgia. So for the governor to say, oh, we're going to let, businesses open again. And I'm like, really? And it's difficult because we also need to give voice to our students, and we're not doing that. And to think that they only have time to sit here on a computer and answer some questions is ridiculous. That's it.
Thank you so much.
Oh, yeah, so I was going to say that, and I talked about this in the group. I was a part of Caroline's group, or I was in the group with Caroline. I said that my contemplative practice, one of my contemplative practices is pausing and not reacting and taking beats and breaths before responding to something. And so I carried that into this situation. And, to echo what Catalina said, it's not only the case that last semester's syllabus doesn't apply, the beginning of the semester syllabus no longer applies. And so it's really important, for us to be able to step outside of ourselves and to think about all of the things that people have been mentioning about what the students are dealing with. Some students indeed are fine, but we know other students are, going back to places where, they're getting a break from that home space when they're on campus during the semester. They've lost that, and all sorts of other things. And so I think contemplative practices are so important in terms of allowing us to step outside of ourselves at moments when it's really, really important. I mean, it's always important, but I think in the service of our students, like you all have been saying, it's really important.
Yeah. Thank you, Rachel. I'm not sure if everyone has their group chat open. Caroline said that Catalina is a truth teller. It's true. Michelle Levere, some people need to stick to routines in order to remain in control. When things are out of control, some people hold on to power where they can, even if it's detrimental to self or others. And then Patricia said, no emotional awareness and emotional management learning unless it is in the home. So smaller numbers are allowed to process fear, uncertainty. The emotions of kids are evident, all ages. Yes, voice for kids. And to her point, I have seen a lot more language around social and emotional learning in the K-12 environment than in higher ed. It's like we think it doesn't, we assume that students have that maybe, which is why I noted David Treleaven's point. We can no longer say that student well-being, student mental health, student social and emotional learning and management happens outside of academia. We have students coming from all different types of backgrounds. And it's not just students who have had prior experiences with trauma. It's also students who had a lot of privilege, who are not aware, who are not, who just don't have the skills and the capacity to respond in appropriate ways, quite frankly. So the social emotional learning bit, I don't have that slide in here, but I can add it before I send it out. There are 5 or 6 competencies within social and emotional learning. There's self-awareness, social awareness, responsible decision-making, relationships, and so forth. So I'll share that. And I think we need to think more intentionally about how we support students, sometimes faculty and staff, in developing those competencies.
Could I just jump in with one small thing? Maybe back to one I was thanking Rachel for what she said about pausing in the smaller group, and how that was both an important reminder to me now and a reminder about something I've done effectively, at least at times in the past, in terms of just trying to respond to email once a day, and how that simple practice has made a difference. And actually it's a reminder to try to re-engage with that, because it's been harder in this moment of quarantine and staying at home. But I guess understanding has been another sort of watchword, because I found myself getting upset with some people, whether in my work life or family members, and just trying to remember that folks are under lots of pressures that sometimes we don't see, that is causing them to behave in bizarre ways, or ways that seem initially bizarre.
Yeah, definitely. Understanding and patience. Yeah, and extending that compassion to others, you know, the compassion that we need to have for ourselves, that we expect others to have for us, extending that compassion to them as well. It's difficult. It's difficult, but really helpful. We can manage it. Yeah. If there aren't any other questions, I wanted to offer a bit of music, but I'm not confident that the technology will hold up. I'll just be honest about that. But I will tell you a couple of pieces that I turned to are Ahmad Jamal's Love Theme from Spartacus. You can find it on YouTube. It is about 3 minutes and 56 seconds. And I offer it as a practice for my students, because they know that, you know, a song will have a beginning and an end, and I won't have them sitting quietly for 10 minutes. And the music is just absolutely beautiful. And it invites an inward journey. I also used Welcome by John Coltrane, which you can also find on YouTube. Welcome by John Coltrane. It was recently Ocean Song by Pharaoh Saunders, which is a longer piece. It's about 8 minutes, but it is gorgeous. So whatever music works for you, you know, I think one of the major points about contemplative practices when faculty, when teachers offer them to students is, I certainly will, Catalina, thank you, is to, you know, it's about authenticity. It's about sharing with students what allows you to show up, what allows you to be present. Because I honestly think that more than teaching my students practices, what has impacted my teaching the most and their learning is how the practices allow me to show up as a teacher, how it allows me to be compassionate, how it allows me to be patient, how it allows me to respond and not react, right? All of those things. I think that is probably the greater benefit than teaching the student or showing a student how to sit for a few minutes quietly or to do reflective journaling. I think it's really about how it allows me to be present for them. Yeah. So in these few minutes remaining, I wanted to bring in a special guest. Right? The guest brings in a guest. She's not really a guest. She's one of your own. Professor Alyssa, I think, Margolin, wonderful. She is a professorial lecturer in health studies. And I met Alyssa at the Ann Farron conference. We were on a panel together, she and I, and Drina Thomas and Michelle Beer were also on the call. Thank you so much for being here. She's a full-time faculty member in the Department of Health Studies for nearly a decade. She worked in the service of some of the world's poorest, providing technical direction, management, and leadership of national level public health programs in Asia, Africa, and the Caribbean. She's also a registered advanced yoga teacher. And one of the reasons why I wanted her to speak is because she integrates practice. She teaches from a contemplative approach. And I thought it would be wonderful for folks to know about her. Like right here at AU, you've got a resource. There are a few resources. There's also, Paul Walker, who teaches in the School of International Service. He's a member of our C-Mind community. So there are folks around to whom you have access. So Alyssa, if you want to say a few words, and I'm going to ask her to lead us in a closing practice if other folks don't have questions or comments.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? Okay, great. My internet just in the 2 minutes ago started to get very wonky. So you may have seen me popping in and out. I apologize. So please let me know if you can't hear or see me at some point, and then I will try to restart something. Michelle, thank you so much for organizing this, and David for hosting us. This is so lovely to be together. And I was so excited to see that you were doing this, and it was such a delight to be with you all in January. So it's really nice to be back together, and I'm honored that you asked me to speak. So yeah, this is so nice to just hear what everyone is doing and to be in the company of many colleagues and friends who are thinking about similar approaches to this moment and similar ways of bringing some of this as tools of support and of ways of sort of framing how we engage with ourselves and with our communities, but also as faculty members with our students. So I thought I would just share a little bit about what I've been doing with my own students, if that's helpful for all of you. And then I just thought I would maybe lead you through something like what I've been leading my students through, and just so you can sort of have a sense of that or a flavor for that. So I often share with others when I'm teaching, and maybe I shared this with some of you in January as well, but I like thinking about the original meaning that dish is presence. And I like that thought that this is not just a practice of what we do with our mind, but really how we can be present from a heartful place. And so this moment, I think, is also calling us each to bear witness with compassion and to bear witness to the full range of suffering that, that all of us and all of our students are experiencing on some very wide spectrum, right? Whether it's the challenge and the suffering of just navigating life online, or to the very real suffering of, and I'm sure many of you have watched this narrative shift just over the time of us being online, but the narrative shift from sort of challenge of inconvenience to challenge of grief and suffering and loss and fear. And so as we hold space for that as educators and as
Let's see, your Wi-Fi might have gotten wonky again. I'm going to turn your video off in the hopes that that might improve things. Fingers crossed.
Let me see if I can connect. Let me see.
Hold on one second, folks. I just sent Alyssa a message because, let's see. Oh,
Okay.
there you're back. We lost you for about a minute. But now.
Oh no, okay. I just tried connecting to a hotspot. Does that sound better?
Yeah, you're great now.
Okay. Okay, good. Sorry about that. I don't know where I lost you. But I will just jump in. I was talking about this sense of open-hearted presence.
Right about
and that this, okay. That, as we just, that these practices have been helpful for me and hopefully for my students to really bear witness with a great deal of compassion for the full spectrum of suffering, from the suffering of inconvenience of shifting online into the real sort of new narrative of grief and loss and suffering that many of us and our students are feeling in a very personal way. So I have been I've been teaching synchronously for all of my classes, and I've been starting each of those classes with the same idea that I do with all of my classes in person, which is to start with some mindfulness. That mindfulness has shifted a little bit now, the way that I'm doing it and the types of things that I'm leading. But very much in line with what you were sharing, Michelle, just, the beginning, just the very simple remembering. And I like this term too, like the remembering of breath and body, but where you sort of come back into your own self, and just the groundedness that that can afford us. Of feeling your feet on the floor, of feeling one breath all the way in, all the way out, of listening to sounds around you that just, whatever those sounds are, and if they're natural sounds, and if that gives you a sense of reconnecting to nature, that all of those things can just, reconnect us in a way. And then a real focus on connection. And because we're in this weird disembodied virtual space, I've been trying to do some visualizations. Often I find, I don't know for all of you, but often I find most students don't have their cameras on for myriad reasons. And of course I wouldn't ask them to do that. There are lots of reasons why you wouldn't, but so we don't always see each other. And so that sort of contributes to the sense of disembodiedness. And so I'll often lead students through sort of a visualization, and I'll do that with you as well, but just of really feeling held by the community, even if it's virtual, and to be sort of nurtured by the community that we built together already when we were in person, and to know that that still exists, and just sort of really draw on that. I loved what you shared about yes, and I've been doing a lot of sort of gratitude practice and thoughts in with my students, with my family as well. But I think the yes and giving people permission to celebrate the things that bring joy, because sometimes I feel like there can be a sense of guilt, or like there's so much going on. How can I allow myself the space to smile, to notice this thing that's wonderful, that's joyful? And so sort of naming that yes and that the two can happen and don't have to be mutually exclusive. And again, echoing what you were sharing, Michelle, but this real sense of intentionality of, and I teach public health, so really connecting my students back to this sense, while sometimes it feels kind of strange to come back to just the routine of what we're doing that's normal. It's sort of like, how can we do this thing that's normal when nothing about this moment is normal? Right? And it sometimes can feel like on my end, okay, everybody gets an A. This is ridiculous. Like, why are we going through the motions of this? And for them, I think it can feel really like, why are we doing this? And I've been having for myself this tremendous sense of responsibility that all of my students, some of them only a semester into their public health education, some of them graduating seniors, but they've been flung back out into their communities as public health ambassador, and likely someone who has even a little bit more information, some of them a lot more understanding about what's going on than probably anybody else in their household, or maybe anybody else in their community. And so I feel this huge responsibility to, I want them to really to get it as well as they can, to understand it as well as they can, to share it as well as they can. I also teach stress management. So for those students, I feel like, gosh, you're also ambassadors of that. And I want you to bring that to your families. They've been bringing their moms and sisters and cousins, whoever's in their house, to our classes to join in meditations and join in yoga classes together. And but there's this duality, and I imagine some of you feel that, but I've been trying to give them this to reconnect them to a sense of purpose, of like, even though it feels very strange to be here, it's also okay to allow yourself the moment just to be a student, that it's okay, even though this is such a strange moment, that it's okay for you to be here and just learn. And that might feel like a luxury right now, and it is in some ways, that we get to continue to learn and to teach in the midst of all of this, but that that they committed to that with real purpose and intention. And I've been trying to sort of remind us all that there's an intention and a purpose to what we're doing as educators, and what they're doing as learners, and what we're doing together in that space. And I loved what you shared about, who can we be when this is over? And that's something I've been trying to do a lot too. I'm a part of a mindfulness training group with Jack Kornfield and Tara Brock, and one of my colleagues in that shared something that I love, that she sort of said, as we take this collective gasp, this global gasp right now, what can we exhale into? What is it that we can imagine for ourselves? And maybe I'll lead us through a little bit of this when we do just a brief meditation. But I think it's really powerful for each of us individually to imagine what that better future is. And it's different for each one of us, but I imagine there are common threads for all of that. And just to sort of recognize this as an opportunity is really powerful too. So that was a lot of talking, but just about some of what I've been trying to do in the context of my own classes and with my own students.
Do you offer, I mean, I know the circumstances are not normal, but have you been offering like a mindfulness meditation group or anything on campus, on AU's campus, or do you, is there a place where folks can come and get more resources around contemplative pedagogy or practice for themselves?
Yeah, so I have regularly offered like once or twice a year something at the Aunt Varian conference or something in the summer through CTRL. I haven't yet hosted a more regular thing, though this particular moment in time has been making me feel like we just all need more space for more of this and more connection. And so stay tuned for that. But there are a lot of people on campus doing, engaged in this kind of work. So at times, Case Spiritual Center has offered some of these practices. There have been Mindful Monday, like a regular Monday gathering. There was a regular Wednesday gathering. There have been different things at different times. There's I think a lot of folks thinking about it and practicing, but no. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you. So before we move into the closing practice, I just wanted to know if any other folks had questions or comments or things they wanted to express. So I do have a request. I'll take that as a no. I do have a request. I'm not going to play the music, but I would like us to just feel our own voice for a moment. And then I'll turn it back over to Alyssa to offer. Am I saying your name correctly, Alyssa, or is it Elisa? Alyssa? Thank you. That's important to me. Thanks. So I sing a little bit, and there's a practice that I started doing a while ago, and it's really just humming. It's just humming. And I'd like to know if, I'd like to invite you to just kind of do this humming practice. And maybe since there aren't that many of us on the call, we could unmute and just sort of see how it goes, right? And all you do simply is you inhale through the nose, and on the exhale, you hum. And just feel the resonance of your own voice in your body. And then we'll see if we can withstand hearing each other in virtual space through technology. We'll see how it goes. Right? So if you'd like, you can place your hand on your heart or somewhere on your body, or just have your hands at your sides. We're going to inhale deeply through the nose. And on the exhale, just again, inhale deeply through the nose. Nice full breath. And exhale and Just feel a sense of groundedness. The spaciousness and the light. I'll turn it over to Alyssa. Please take us out. David, I think Alyssa needs you to unmute her.
Thank you, David.
I was in the moment, I'm sorry.
I was trapped in a moment of silence. Thank you. Okay, well, thank you for that. Okay, so I'm honored to get to lead you in a little bit of a closing meditation. So I'll just invite you to get really comfortable wherever you are. Settle into a seat, or if you're standing, just settle into that space. And if it feels okay to close your eyes, I invite you to do that. Just take a deep breath in and let it go. And this time, as you inhale, allow the whole trunk of your body to fill with your breath. So fill into your belly, fill into the spaces between your ribs, fill into the back of your body, feel your kidneys and the space behind your shoulder blades swelling with your breath all the way up into your collarbones. And then when you get to the top of your inhale, pause for a moment and inhale just a little bit more. Notice that you can. And then exhale, let it go slowly, luxuriously. So you feel all the tendrils of your breath gone. And when you get to the end of that exhale, pause for a moment again. And then exhale just a little bit more. And again, just a few more really nourishing inhales. And cathartic, luxurious exhales. This breath of life. This breath that connects us over space, across the states, across the continents. This breath that connects us to our ancestors, to our descendants, and to all the other living creatures that we share this earth with. Just breathing into that space of connection. I feel knitted into that web of connection. Allow your feet on the floor, on your bed, or wherever you are, allow your feet to just relax. Feel them really connect with the floor. If you can easily kick off your shoes, do that. Just feel the soles of your bare feet on the floor. And imagine that that floor could dissolve all the way down to the earth. Imagine you could feel your toes. Whatever the earth looks like near you, maybe it's the sand, maybe it's mud, maybe it's rocky, maybe it's grass. Just imagine you could feel your feet there and supported by this Mother Earth, held in this moment, this unprecedented moment of history where everything is changing moment by moment, when we are very much out of control much of the time. The sense of just being still, being held, being connected to the earth can be so nourishing. To feel that, and then a moment just to allow your awareness to scan with kindness, with tenderness from your feet, these relaxed, grounded feet, all the way to the crown of your head and any places in your body where you might be holding tension. meet it with kindness, meet it with tenderness, and then give an invitation to soften. Maybe in your belly, maybe in your shoulders, back of your neck. Maybe there's a gripping in your jaw, or a tightening of the muscles around your eyes, wherever it is, maybe many places, just a few moments to soften, to unwind the tension that for many of us is present much more of the time than it may often be. And as you relax into this body and ride the waves of each breath, maybe just imagine, without opening your eyes if they're closed, just imagine the faces of this community that we've built in the last 2 hours. Imagine each of the faces, imagine each of them smiling back at you. Imagine all that each of those faces is holding, what's in the heart of each of us, each of our shares of challenge, of sorrow, and of joy. Just feel that collective that each of us is holding. And you might imagine, for instance, perhaps I could throw a ball of yarn to Michelle. She could throw it to David. And just, imagine this. He could throw it to Patricia, and on. And that we could just, across all of our states, all of our homes, we connect each other in this web. I just feel held by that web. Though it's somewhat disembodied, somewhat remote, just know that there is a community and a connection that's holding you. And that in this community, there is a shared intention. And that each of us is holding on to our own intention. And so you might just for a moment let that bubble up in your heart without thinking too much. But what is it that drew you to be here, to spend these 2 precious hours together right now? What is it that you were hoping to hold with you when you left this practice, this connection? And perhaps that intention is a little seed, and a seed for what you hope tomorrow might look like, and the next day, and that tomorrow in your own home, that tomorrow in the community of your classes, or the community of your family. And as each one of us, all the billions of people on the planet who are collectively pausing this unprecedented moment, if each of us waters this seed of intention over the next days, weeks, imagine what those seeds blossom into as we all, at some point, restart, reboot from this collective shutdown. So again, let the feet settle on the floor. Take a really full breath in. And your longest, most luxurious exhale yet today. Let yourself sit up a little taller. Reclaim your space of nobility. Your eyes are closed. You could gradually let them start to flutter open. Thanks everybody for letting me share that moment with you.
Thank you so much.
You're so welcome.
And thank you, David and Rachel, for inviting me to share a bit. I really appreciate it. I'll send the slides to you, David. My contact information is at the end of the presentation. I'm happy to hear from anyone that has more questions. So thank you so very much.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Alyssa. I think this is incredibly moving and helpful and important for all of us, and will be to yet more people were able to watch or listen later. I think, Michelle's offering to bring Alyssa into the conversation and to let her, lead part of the session just speaks to the open heart that she brings to all her work. And I'm just so grateful. And I think I know our entire department is grateful that she was able to take the time and lead us today. So can we all give Michelle a huge round of applause and thanks for her great work. And wait, I'm gonna make sure that you're all unmuted so that we can, you need to unmute yourself as well, but you're all unmuted now.
Thank you so much, Michelle.
Gracias, gracias.